Okay, so this is kind of where we left off. We had the ability to add images, and what we have now is basically a page that kind of looks like Wikipedia, where we've got a table with some images and some of the text. Um, Instead of this table, I'd like to make it look more like this, kind of like a Pinteresty feel, um, or a recipe deck kind of feel, where you've got three columns and we're pulling we're pulling the same content. It's just formatted in a different way. So this is really our first kind of jump into front end design um, using CSS. So let's jump in and let's go into our index page. So just to remind you, our index page is under Views, Recipes, Index. Okay, so if you are confused and you think, man, I didn't create all this code. This code is actually automatically created for you um, from the scaffold we made of the recipe model at the very beginning. And so what I want to do, instead of making this in a table, I want to display the content differently. So the first thing we'll do is we'll just remove all of the stuff that makes it a table. We're going to remove the table, all of the table elements. And so we'll just delete everything. We want to keep our variables, so don't lose your variables. Just delete the TD tags and the table tags and all that stuff. So we want to keep all of our variables. Okay, so now we've removed all of our variables from the table. If we reload, it's just rows of content now. So we're actually closer to what we need to be, but not quite where we need to be. So a couple things that I want to show you that are kind of vital. One, this for each loop. So this recipes.each loop, and we're defining our variable in this loop as well. But this is, for each recipe, we're going to show all of this stuff. So whatever we do to this, we'll do to each of these entries. So one thing I want to do is I want to add a div around this entire bit of content. And I want to call it, I'm going to call it recipe box. And I'm going to go into my assets, style sheets, application.scss, and I'm just going to start to style. So I'm going to open up our class recipe box, and we're going to just put a border for now of 1 pixel. We're going to put a solid black border around each of these. So that what should happen is a border should go around each of these. Great. Okay, so now we need to get these things in 3 columns instead of rows. So 3 columns instead of rows. So we can use the Bootstrap grid system. So if you Google Bootstrap grid, you can read up on this yourself if you'd like. Grid system. Read up on this yourself if you'd like. But I'll just kind of walk us through. So what we're going to do is for each, let's see. For all of the recipes, we're going to put them in a row. So we're going to open up row above our loop, our recipe loop. We're going to close it here, and I'm just going to put in a comment, row close. And then for each of our recipe boxes, we want to float them in columns that span 4 that span 4 cells. So basically each row is made up of 12 columns. So we want, if we want 3 columns total, we want columns that will span 4 of the 12, or 12 divided by 4 is 3. Sorry for the confusion. We want each of the recipe boxes to span 4 of the 12 grid lines. Okay, so it looks like it's doing something. Let's see. I think we want. Where do we want the row? I think we may want the row in the. I'm not sure about this, but let me check. I think we may want it inside the. Oh, I know what it was. Don't do anything. Go back to what we had. I think we want the row inside the, outside the loop, and then the col MD4 was outside the loop on accident, so I moved it inside. So that's why it's important to actually put some comments in your code. Okay, so let's see if that, there we go. Perfect. So these are floating next to each other, so that's good. That looks nice. What we do need to do is we need to fix these images. And so right now we have a class called recipe show on these images for the show page. Let's call these recipe, let's change this to recipe index, and let's create a new style. So if we go image.recipe index, what we really want to do is we want a full width. We want a full width image. So we want it to be the full width of this recipe box. And if we want the boxes to be the same height, let's set a height on them of 400 pixels. And so let's set our height of our image to be 80% of 400 pixels. So let's see what that looks like. Great. So it's looking kind of how we want it. The problem is it's kind of blurry and messes with the aspect ratio. So there's this really cool CSS3 command called object fit. It won't work on IE 10 and below, but who really uses IE 10 and below anyways? Just kidding, that was a joke. Object fit cover, and that should basically make it a cover image. So it'll zoom in on the image and make it fit however wide the boxes get. Okay, so that looks nice. One other thing that we want to do is we want to, I would just put the all of the text in a list so that they kind of go on top of each other, and then wrap each of these in a list item. And then I'm just going to put all 3 of these, show, edit, destroy, in one list item. So these will show up next to each other. There we go. Show, edit, destroy. And what we can do is I'll just put little or vertical dividers for show, edit, and destroy. The other thing is we probably want to remove the bullet items. So let's call up that particular unordered list, recipe box UL, and we'll just say list style type none, and we'll remove those bullets. So if we refresh, they're gone. Beautiful. And we want our first item, which is always our title, to be bigger. So what we can do is we can do recipe box UL li first child. So this is a pseudo class. We can do font size 24 pixels. We can bump up the font size of the first list item. Great. So it's looking more like what we want. I think I want the recipe boxes to be a little bit taller, so I'm going to change that to 500 pixels. Yeah, that's better. And then I'd like maybe a little more, maybe 600 pixels. And I'd like the, I think I'd like the images to be a little bit less height. So I'm going to change the height to 70% instead of 80%. And then I'd like to bump all of this text down to the bottom of the div. So to do that, we're going to use positioning. And we're going to put a relative position on the recipe box, which is the container. And then on the UL, we're going to put a absolute position relative to the recipe box, and then we can just do bottom 0, and that should push all of this stuff to the bottom. Beautiful. So now it's looking a lot more like what we want it to look like. I think the last thing I'll do in this video is to add a container to our index. So Bootstrap already has built-in container classes. So if you just add a container to whatever files you would like to render in a container, they'll be in a container. So that's looking really good. The last thing is let's add a little drop shadow. So if you just Google CSS box shadow, let's grab the default box shadow from the W3 schools, and let's add it to our recipe box. And I'm going to remove my border and just keep the box shadow. Great. All right, so it's looking a little better. It's kind of blending in to the white background, so maybe we'll change the background color of the recipe boxes too. So I'm just going to kind of grab a nice light silver maybe, and put that background on the recipe box. Now you don't have to do this. Again, if you're going to, I actually don't like that. That's too dark. If you're going to choose the front-end designer track of the project, you can feel free to change any of this. I'm just kind of showing you how to do some front-end design in CSS. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to link up the images to the recipe path. And to do this, it's a little bit tricky, and what we need to do actually is to remove this if statement, because Rails for some reason doesn't like that with the link tag. So instead, I'm going to add it as a separate Ruby tag, and then I'm going to end it. I'm just going to kind of do what we did previously. So if recipe.image, and then we'll add this image tag. So what we want to do is we want to link to the image tag, and we want to put all of that link to image tag in parentheses, and then after that we want a comma, then we want to specify where we want to link to. And we want to link to recipe is the show path, and so that should take us to the specific recipe we're looking for. So if we refresh, that should take us to the recipe. Great. So just to show you that this works, let's add a third meatballs. This is a spicy meatball. And if we go back to our index, they show up 3 at a time. And it's actually, Bootstrap is automatically, Bootstrap is automatically responsive, which is great. Okay, so that's it. I'll let the designers design away as you'd like. The last video, what we'll do is we'll add a header, navigation bar, and a static page.